The room was full. Not just full of people, full of noise. Chairs scraped the floor as latecomers squeezed into the last open spots. Coffee cups clinked against saucers. Someone's phone buzzed twice before they remembered to silence it. Conversations overlapped in quick, impatient bursts. Project updates, tiny complaints, side jokes, the kind of chatter that happens when everyone is slightly tense but pretending they're not. It was one of those meetings where the air feels crowded. A long glass table sat in the center, reflecting the overhead lights. Not warm light, clean, corporate light. On one side of the room, a wall-mounted screen displayed a spreadsheet that looked like a warning sign. Red numbers, downward arrows, deadlines stacked like bricks. Everyone could feel it. Something was off. For the past 2 weeks, the team had been moving fast but not together. People were working hard, but the work wasn't landing the way it should. Tasks were getting done, but results were slipping. And when results slip, something always follows. Fear. Not loud fear. Quiet fear. The kind that makes people talk more than usual, explain too much, defend themselves before anyone even attacks. So they filled the room with words. You said the client wanted it by Friday? But I didn't approve that timeline. I sent the draft, I swear. I can pull the email. Look, we just need clarity. We need direction. The word direction got thrown around like a life raft. But nobody was actually steering. At the far end of the table, Amir sat with his notebook closed. Not because he wasn't paying attention, because he didn't need the notebook yet. He wasn't the official manager. He didn't have a fancy title. He was technically just senior operations, which meant he was the person everyone quietly depended on but didn't always publicly recognize. He listened the way some people watch a fire, carefully, without panic, aware that one wrong move can make it bigger. As voices rose and sentences collided, he didn't interrupt. He didn't compete. He didn't try to prove that he knew the most. He just watched the pattern. And the pattern was obvious. Everyone was talking, but nobody was communicating. There's a difference. Talking is sound. Communication is direction. The room kept filling with words. People leaned forward, palms on the table, eyebrows lifted like weapons. Someone tapped a pen so fast it sounded like a countdown. A teammate named Hira spoke with a tight smile. We can't keep doing this, okay? Every time something goes wrong, we end up in circles. We need someone to just decide. Just tell us what we're doing. Her tone wasn't disrespectful. It was tired. She wasn't demanding power, she was asking for relief. Another teammate, Saad, sighed and rubbed his forehead. We're all trying. But nothing is clear. One person says one thing, another person says another thing. And then the deadline hits and suddenly it's everyone's fault. Someone else muttered, this is why titles matter. The word titles hung in the air for half a second like a spark. Amir felt it land. He felt the slight shift in energy, the way people's eyes flicked toward certain faces. The way shoulders tightened. The way blame was trying to find a home. And that's when he noticed something else. The silence under the noise. People were scared. Not of the work. Of being exposed. Of looking incompetent. Of losing trust. And when people feel that fear, they overcompensate with words. They speak fast. They speak loud. They speak defensively. They speak to protect, not to lead. Amir let them finish. He waited until the room reached that familiar peak, when everyone has said too much and still feels unheard. When the conversation starts repeating itself in new sentences. When frustration begins to feel like a loop. And then, without drama, he spoke. Not loudly. Not with a, let me stop you there tone. Just, calmly. Can I try something? It wasn't a command. It wasn't a flex. It was an invitation. But it landed like a bell. The room did something strange. It didn't just quiet down, it aligned. Chairs stopped moving. The pen tapping slowed. Someone's half-open mouth closed as if their brain finally caught up to their body. And then the room went silent. Not awkward silent. Not offended silent. Not, we're waiting for the boss silent. It was the kind of silence that happens when people suddenly feel like something important is about to happen. Amir looked around, meeting eyes briefly, not staring. Just acknowledging. He wasn't trying to dominate anyone. He wasn't hunting for authority. He was offering stability. No shouting, he said, still calm. No blaming. Just clarity. His voice didn't rise at the end of the sentence. That mattered. It made the words feel finished. Certain. Like a door closing gently, not slamming. He leaned forward slightly, not because he needed to perform but because he wanted them to hear him without effort. Here's what I'm hearing, he continued. We have 3 issues. Not 10. Not 20. 3. He raised 3 fingers, not theatrically. just enough for the room to follow his structure. 1, he said, we're not aligned on what done looks like. Different people have different definitions. That's causing rework. 2, he said, our timeline is being treated like a suggestion. Not because we don't care, but because nobody is confident enough to defend it or adjust it. And 3, he finished, we're carrying tension we haven't named. So we keep talking around it and the words get louder because the truth stays hidden. He let it sit. That pause was not empty. It was intentional. In that pause, something shifted. People didn't feel accused. They felt understood. Because there's a kind of calm that doesn't just sound good. It creates safety. Amir looked at the screen, then back at them. If we solve those 3 things, this project moves. If we don't, we'll keep meeting like this every week until the deadline hits us in the face. Still no drama. Still no sarcasm. Just truth. Saad blinked, his shoulders dropping a fraction. Hira's expression softened. Someone at the far end exhaled like they'd been holding their breath for days. Amir wasn't using fancy words. No big vocabulary. No executive speech. Nothing that sounded like he memorized leadership quotes. It was the opposite. It was simple, clear, human. And that's the moment most people misunderstand leadership. They think leaders speak more. In reality, leaders speak better. Amir didn't fight for attention. He didn't chase the room like a performer trying to hold an audience. He commanded it without demanding it. He continued calmly. Let's do this in 5 minutes. First, we agree on what done means. 1 sentence. If we can't say it in 1 sentence, it's not clear enough. He turned to Hira. In your words, what does done look like for the client? Hira opened her mouth, then paused. You could almost see her mind shifting gears. Not to argue. To clarify. Done means, she started slowly, the client can use the tool without needing our help. Not just a finished design. Amir nodded. Great. Usable without support. That's a strong definition. Then he looked at Saad. From your side, what does done mean? Saad hesitated. Done means everything is approved. Like formally signed off. Amir nodded again. Okay. Approved and usable. Both matter. He wrote it down on his notebook, then spoke it back to the room. So done means, approved and usable without support. He didn't ask if they liked it. He didn't throw it back as a question. He stated it. And the room accepted it because it made sense. That's another thing leaders do with language. They don't leave everything floating. They land the plane. He moved to the second issue. Timeline. Right now, we're pretending the timeline is fixed when it's not. We have 2 options. Protect the scope or protect the date. We can't protect both. Someone started to speak, but Amir lifted his hand gently, not a shut-up gesture, more like a hold that thought. His face stayed calm. Let's not argue, he said. Let's decide. Just those words, let's not argue. Let's decide. Change the temperature of the room. Because arguing is exhausting. Deciding is relief. He looked at the group. What is the bigger cost if we miss it? Missing the date or delivering something half-baked? This time he didn't fill the silence for them. He waited. And in that silence, something powerful happened. People started thinking instead of reacting. A quiet voice from the side spoke up. If we deliver half-baked, we lose trust. The date won't matter after that. Amir nodded. Agreed. He turned toward the screen. So we protect quality. That means we adjust scope. We cut non-essential features. Today. No shouting. No fancy words. No drama. Just a calm voice. And somehow everyone leaned in. Because leaders don't talk to impress. They talk to move people. He addressed the 3rd issue last, the one most people avoid. The tension, he said. We don't need a therapy session. But we do need honesty. The room stiffened slightly. You could feel the instinct to protect. To hide. Amir didn't push. He didn't shame anyone. He didn't call out names. He didn't weaponize vulnerability. He just named the truth like it was normal. We've been operating like everyone's alone, he said, and that makes people defensive. Not because they're bad people. Because they're human. His tone was warm now, still firm but softer. So I want to say one thing clearly, if something slips, we fix it together. We don't isolate. We don't whisper. We don't keep score. He paused again. And in that pause you could see it in faces, relief. Not complete relief, this wasn't magic. But something. A crack in the armor. Hira swallowed. I've been feeling like I have to carry everything. Like if something fails, it's on me. Saad nodded quickly. Same. Another teammate admitted quietly, I didn't speak up last week because I didn't want to look incompetent. Amir listened. No interrupting. No lecture. No, see, that's the problem. Just listening. And when the room finished, he said a sentence that didn't sound like a leader trying to perform leadership. It sounded like a person who understood people. Thank you, he said. That honesty is the reset. The meeting didn't magically solve everything. They still had work. They still had pressure. They still had deadlines waiting like storms. But the room was different now. The words were different. And that's what language does when it's used with intention. It changes the room before it changes the results. After the meeting, as people packed up, something strange happened. They didn't rush out like they usually did. They lingered. A few people stayed behind, not because they had to, but because they wanted to continue the clarity. Hira walked beside Amir toward the door. She spoke quietly. How did you do that? Amir smiled, small and tired. Do what? Make everyone calm, she said. Make them listen. Amir didn't answer immediately. He looked down the hallway where the office lights reflected off the polished floor. For a moment he seemed to be remembering something. It's not a trick, he said finally. People think leadership is about having the perfect words. It's not. It's about having the right intention. Hira frowned slightly. What do you mean? Amir stopped walking. Not abruptly. Gently. He turned toward her like this mattered. When people speak, he said, most of the time they're trying to protect themselves. They're trying to be right, or light, or safe. He shrugged. That makes the voice shaky, or loud, or messy. And leaders? She asked. Leaders, he said, speak to protect the mission. And the people. That changes everything. Hira stared at him, processing. Amir continued, softer now. And here's the secret nobody teaches you. Calm is contagious. If you bring calm into a chaotic room, it gives everyone permission to breathe. He smiled again. Then you don't need to fight for attention. People give it to you. That line stayed with her. Because it was true. Leadership doesn't start with a title. It starts with how you speak. Not big vocabulary. Not sounding smart. Not being the loudest. But being intentional. Being clear. Being calm. Being someone whose words feel like direction, not noise. Later that night, Hira sat in her car before driving home. The engine was off. The parking lot was quiet. Her phone sat face down on the passenger seat. She replayed the meeting in her mind, like a scene she couldn't stop watching. The room was full. Everyone was talking. But when he spoke, the room went silent. She realized something uncomfortable. She had been trying to lead by doing more. By staying later. By pushing harder. By explaining again and again and again until her voice felt tired. But Amir had led by doing something else. He made fewer words count more. He didn't speak to prove. He spoke to guide. And suddenly it wasn't about his position. It was about his presence. That night she decided to try something different. Not tomorrow. Not one day. No. The next morning she walked into the office with one goal, to speak with intention. In the first meeting, when someone started spiraling into details, she didn't match the chaos. She didn't jump in with 5 explanations. She took a breath. And she said one sentence. Let's clarify what success looks like. The room paused. People looked at her. Not because she was loud. Because she was clear. Her heartbeat sped up. She felt that old fear rise. What if they don't take me seriously? What if I sound too simple? But then she remembered Amir's calm voice. Not fancy. Not dramatic. Just steady. So she stayed steady. And something surprising happened. They listened. Not perfectly. Not instantly. But enough to notice. After the meeting, a teammate said, that helped. Thank you. 2 words, that helped. And Hira felt something shift inside her. This wasn't about learning leadership language like a script. It was about becoming the kind of person whose words create peace and direction. Because the truth is, influence is not about force. Influence is about trust. And trust is built every time you speak in a way that makes people feel clear, safe, and guided. That's why this story isn't about big vocabulary. It's not about sounding smart. It's about learning how leaders use words to influence, inspire, and move people, without forcing anything. Because leadership doesn't start with a title. It starts with how you speak. And sometimes, all it takes is one calm voice in a noisy room to change everything. Most people talk constantly. They talk when they're nervous. They talk when they're unsure. They talk because silence feels uncomfortable, like an empty space that must be filled immediately. They explain too much. They repeat themselves. They rush to add just one more thing, afraid that if they stop speaking they'll disappear. And without realizing it, something subtle happens. They lose power. Not all at once. Not loudly. But quietly, word by word. Because when words are everywhere, they stop having value. Think about how often this shows up in everyday life. In meetings, someone speaks for 10 minutes straight, circling the same point again and again. They use bigger words, longer sentences, more explanations, believing that more language equals more authority. But as they talk, eyes begin to drift. People check their phones. Minds wander. The speaker doesn't notice. They keep going. And with every extra sentence, their influence fades. In arguments, too many words turn clarity into chaos. Instead of resolving the issue, the conversation expands. Old frustrations get pulled in. Tone replaces meaning. The original point gets buried under explanations, defenses, and emotional reactions. What started as a simple disagreement becomes noise. And in everyday conversations, people talk over each other, not because they're confident but because they're afraid of being ignored. Silence feels like losing. Pausing feels like weakness. So everyone keeps talking. But here's the truth most people never learn. The loudest person is rarely the leader. You can feel this instinctively. In any room, office, family gathering, or group of friends, there's usually one person who dominates the conversation. They interrupt. They explain. They correct. They fill every gap with sound. Yet when a real decision needs to be made, people don't look to them. They look elsewhere. They look to the person who speaks calmly. The one who listens fully. The one who doesn't rush to prove anything. The longest speaker is rarely the most respected. Length is often mistaken for depth. But depth doesn't come from how much you say, it comes from how precise you are. When someone speaks endlessly, it signals uncertainty. It suggests they're trying to convince rather than communicate. Respect is earned when words feel intentional, not excessive. And the one who explains the most is often the least trusted. This may sound uncomfortable, but think about it carefully. When someone keeps explaining, justifying, defending, what does it imply? That they expect doubt. That they're afraid of misunderstanding. That they don't believe their words can stand on their own. Confidence doesn't need a paragraph to make a point. It needs a sentence. Sometimes it needs silence. This is where leadership truly begins. Not with louder voices. Not with faster responses. But with restraint. Leaders understand one simple truth. Attention is earned, not demanded. You can't force people to listen by talking more. In fact, the harder you try, the less they hear. Attention comes from presence. From calm certainty. From knowing when to speak, and when not to. A leader enters a room without announcing themselves. They don't rush to fill the air. They observe. They listen. They let others reveal themselves first. And when they finally speak, the room changes. Not because they're loud, but because they're deliberate. Their words are fewer, but heavier. Each sentence lands because it was chosen, not spilled. There's a quiet confidence in someone who isn't afraid of silence. Silence is not emptiness. It's space. Space to think. Space to listen. Space for meaning to emerge. Most people fear silence because it forces them to confront themselves. In silence, there's no distraction. No performance. No mask. So they talk. But leaders use silence as a tool. They pause before answering, not because they're unsure but because they're intentional. That pause signals control. It tells others, I'm thinking. I'm present. I'm not reacting. And that changes how people perceive them. In conversations, the person who pauses holds the power. While others rush to respond, they wait. They let the moment breathe. And in that space, clarity forms. Silence creates gravity. Think about the most impactful people you've encountered. They weren't the ones who dominated every conversation. They weren't the ones who explained everything in detail. They weren't the ones who spoke first. They were the ones who spoke last. And when they did, it mattered. They didn't need to repeat themselves. They didn't need to convince. Their words felt complete. This is because power isn't in volume. It's in intention. And the fastest way to lose attention is to talk without intention. When you speak out of habit, out of anxiety, out of the need to be seen, you dilute your presence. Your words become background noise. People hear you, but they don't listen. But when you speak with purpose, something shifts. Your voice slows. Your sentences shorten. Your meaning sharpens. You begin to say only what needs to be said. And people notice. They lean in, not because you ask them to, but because they want to. Your words feel valuable because they're rare. Your silence gives them weight. This doesn't mean becoming quiet all the time. It means becoming selective. It means understanding that not every thought needs a voice. Not every moment needs commentary. Not every silence needs filling. In meetings, say less but say it clearly. In conflict, choose one honest sentence instead of 10 defensive ones. In life, let your actions carry the message your words don't need to explain. Because when you stop talking just to be heard, you start being heard without trying. And that is real power. Not loud, not forceful, but calm, grounded, and undeniable. In a world full of noise, the quiet voice stands out. And the person who speaks with intention is the one people remember. Most people speak to release emotion. Leaders speak to create direction. That truth doesn't sound dramatic at first. It sounds simple, almost obvious. But the more you sit with it, the more you realize how much of life it quietly explains. Because if you pay attention, you'll notice it everywhere. In meetings, in families, in friendships, in moments of pressure when something goes wrong and everyone is looking around, waiting for someone, anyone, to say something. That's usually when the noise starts. When things go wrong. When something goes wrong, the room changes instantly. You can feel it in the air. The shift is subtle but unmistakable. Shoulders tense. Breathing becomes shallow. Eyes move faster, searching for blame, for reassurance, for an exit. Someone speaks quickly. Then someone else jumps in. Explanations overlap. Emotions spill out before thoughts have time to form. Most people react. They talk to release what they're feeling: frustration, fear, embarrassment, anger. Words come out fast because silence feels uncomfortable. Silence feels like losing control. But leaders don't rush to fill the space. Leaders respond. And that difference begins with a pause. The power of the pause. The pause doesn't look impressive from the outside. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It doesn't demand attention. Sometimes it's just a few seconds. A breath. A quiet moment where nothing is said. But inside that pause, a lot is happening. A leader is reading the room. They're noticing who's anxious, who's defensive, who's confused, who's waiting to be told what to do next. They're separating facts from emotion, urgency from panic, what matters from what just feels loud. The pause is not weakness. It's control. It's the moment where reaction turns into intention. Ordinary reaction versus intentional response. An ordinary reaction is automatic. Something breaks. Someone makes a mistake. A plan fails. The reaction comes first. This is unacceptable. How did this happen? Why didn't anyone say something sooner? The words might be true, but they don't move the situation forward. They release emotion, but they don't create direction. A leader's response is different. They ask themselves, often without even realizing it, what does this moment need? Not what do I feel, but what does this situation require right now? Calm? Clarity? Reassurance? A decision? That question shapes every word that follows. Speaking with purpose. Every sentence a leader speaks has a job. Not to impress. Not to dominate. Not to sound smart. A job. Sometimes the job is to calm. When people are anxious, words need to slow the room down. Let's take a breath. We have time to think. We'll handle this step by step. The tone matters as much as the words. Calm speech tells the nervous system of everyone listening, you're safe enough to think. Other times the job is to clarify. Confusion creates panic faster than bad news ever could. When no one understands what's happening, imaginations fill the gaps. A leader cuts through that. Here's what we know. Here's what we don't know yet. Here's what we're focusing on first. Clarity reduces fear. It gives people something solid to stand on. Sometimes the job is to guide. People don't always need answers. Often they need direction. Start with this. Talk to this person. Focus on what's in your control. Guidance turns overwhelm into action. And sometimes the job is simply to decide. Not endlessly discuss. Not delay. Not wait for perfect certainty. Just decide. We're moving forward. This is the call. We'll adjust if needed. Decisions create momentum. Even imperfect ones. Nothing is accidental. What separates leaders isn't how much they speak. It's how intentional they are when they do. They don't talk just to be heard. They don't speak just to feel better. They don't explain endlessly to justify themselves. They know that words shape reality. One careless sentence can escalate tension. One thoughtful sentence can steady an entire room. That's why nothing is accidental. The timing, the tone, the length. Sometimes leadership sounds like very few words. The inner work no one sees. What people rarely see is the internal discipline behind that calm response. Leaders feel emotion just as strongly as anyone else. Sometimes more. They feel the pressure, the responsibility, the fear of making the wrong call, the weight of knowing others are depending on them. But instead of releasing that emotion outward, they process it inward. They breathe. They slow their thoughts. They remind themselves, reacting won't help. That self-control isn't coldness. It's care. It's choosing the long-term outcome over the short-term relief of saying whatever comes to mind. Why silence can be stronger than speech. There are moments when the most powerful thing a leader does is say nothing. They let silence do its work. Silence gives people space to think. It signals confidence. It shows you're not threatened by uncertainty. In a world where everyone rushes to speak, the person who pauses stands out. Not because they're louder, but because they're grounded. Becoming that person. This kind of communication isn't about personality. It's not about being naturally calm or introverted or confident. It's a skill. A practice. It starts with awareness. The next time something goes wrong, notice the urge to speak immediately. Notice how fast the words want to come out. Then pause. Even if it's uncomfortable. Even if it feels awkward. Even if others jump in before you do. That pause is you choosing response over reaction. Over time, that pause becomes natural. Your words become fewer, but heavier. Your presence becomes steadier. People start listening not because you talk more, but because when you speak, it matters. The quiet authority. Leaders don't need to announce their authority. It's felt. In the calm they bring into chaos. In the clarity they bring into confusion. In the direction they create when others are stuck. They speak with purpose. They speak with restraint. They speak to move things forward. And that's the difference. Most people speak to release emotion. Leaders speak to create direction. They pause. They choose their words. They speak after they understand the moment. Not because they're unsure, but because they're in control. And in a world full of reactions, that control is what makes their voice matter. The power of what you don't say. One of the strongest leadership skills is restraint. Most people don't believe that at first. It sounds passive. Almost weak. In a world that rewards speed, noise, and constant explanation, restraint feels like doing less. Like holding back. Like staying quiet when you should speak up. But restraint isn't silence. It's precision. Real leaders don't say everything they know. They say what matters. That difference seems small until you feel it in a room. The first time you notice it, you usually notice it by contrast. You're in a meeting. The room is full. Someone starts talking early. They speak quickly, trying to prove competence. They explain every detail, every step, every possible angle. They repeat themselves in different words, just in case someone didn't understand the first time. The air gets heavy. People shift in their seats. Eyes drift to phones. Attention thins out, not because the topic isn't important, but because it's drowning in words. Then someone else speaks. They wait. Just a second longer than expected. They don't rush to fill the silence. They don't compete for space. When they speak, their voice is steady. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just clear. Here's the issue, they say. This is what matters. This is what we're going to do. And suddenly the room changes. People look up. They listen. They remember. That's restraint at work. Why most people over-explain. Most people talk to protect themselves. They explain more because they're afraid of being misunderstood. They add extra words to avoid judgment. They pile on details because they want to look smart, prepared, valuable. It's not arrogance. It's insecurity. Underneath the talking is a quiet fear. If I don't say everything, they won't see my worth. So they talk faster. Longer. Louder. But leadership doesn't come from proving how much you know. It comes from showing you understand what matters most. Leaders don't speak to unload information. They speak to create direction. Short sentences. Clear messages. There's a reason great leaders often sound simple. Not simplistic. Simple. Their sentences are short because they've already done the thinking. Clarity is the result of effort, not the absence of it. It takes work to strip an idea down to its core. To remove the extra words. To resist the urge to explain everything. Short sentences signal confidence. They tell people, I'm not lost inside my own thoughts. They say, I know where this is going. And people feel that. The weight of clear words. Clear messages carry weight. When someone speaks plainly, without decoration, without performance, their words feel grounded. Real. Certain. You don't have to guess what they mean. You don't have to decode their intention. You don't feel confused or unsure. Confusion creates doubt. When people don't understand the message, they start questioning the messenger. They wonder if the leader is unsure. If they're hiding something. If they really know what they're doing. Doubt spreads quietly. Clarity stops it. A moment under pressure. This matters most when things go wrong. Anyone can sound confident when everything is smooth. Leadership shows itself when pressure enters the room. A deadline is missed. A mistake is made. A decision backfires. That's when people start talking too much. They justify. They defend. They explain every reason, every excuse, every context. And the more they speak, the less people trust them. A leader with restraint does the opposite. They pause. They don't rush to control the narrative. They let the moment settle. Then they speak. This is what happened. This is what it means. This is our next step. No blame. No panic. No unnecessary emotion. That calm, measured response does something powerful. It stabilizes people. It tells them the situation is being handled. Restraint becomes reassurance. Why people trust clarity. People trust clarity because clarity feels honest. When someone speaks simply, it feels like there's nothing hidden behind the words. No agenda. No manipulation. No performance. Clear language sounds like truth. It's direct. It's grounded. It's human. And trust grows in that space. Trust isn't built by saying more. It's built by saying what matters and stopping there. The discipline behind restraint. Restraint isn't natural for most people. It's a discipline. It means resisting the urge to interrupt. Resisting the urge to overcorrect. Resisting the urge to fill silence just to feel comfortable. Silence can feel awkward, vulnerable, exposing. But leaders learn to sit inside that discomfort. They understand that silence creates space, and space gives words power. When you don't rush, people lean in. When you don't over-explain, people listen harder. Restraint trains attention. Influence without force. This is where influence comes from. Not from authority. Not from volume. Not from dominance. Influence comes from trust. And trust grows when people feel safe, clear, and guided. A restrained leader doesn't force agreement. They don't push. They don't overwhelm. They state the direction clearly and let the clarity do the work. People follow because it makes sense. Because it feels steady. Because it feels right. The inner shift. At some point, every leader has an internal shift. They stop asking, how do I sound? And start asking, what do people need right now? They stop performing. They stop proving. They stop explaining for the sake of reassurance. They begin choosing words carefully. Intentionally. They understand that every sentence has a job. To clarify. To guide. To decide. To calm. Nothing extra. Nothing accidental. Saying less, leading more. Restraint doesn't mean being distant or cold. It doesn't mean withholding emotion or connection. It means being intentional. It means knowing when to speak, and when not to. It means trusting that your presence doesn't disappear when your words stop. In fact, it grows. When you say less, people notice more. Your tone. Your timing. Your certainty. Your leadership becomes felt, not announced. The quiet authority. The strongest leaders rarely sound dramatic. They don't need to be. Their authority isn't built on force. It's built on consistency, clarity, and control. They don't dominate rooms. They steady them. They don't flood conversations. They shape them. They don't speak to be heard. They speak so others understand. That's restraint. And that restraint becomes influence. The lasting impact. Long after the meeting ends, people remember the clarity. They remember how grounded the message felt. How calm the moment became. How certain the direction was. They don't remember every word. They remember how it made them feel. Confident. Focused. Safe. That's leadership. One of the strongest leadership skills is restraint. Leaders don't say everything they know. They say what matters. Short sentences. Clear messages. No unnecessary details. Because people trust clarity. When a leader speaks in simple, direct language, the message feels confident, grounded, certain. Confusion creates doubt. Clarity creates trust. And trust is influence. Silence is uncomfortable, and that's why it's powerful. Silence makes most people uneasy. Not the kind of silence that comes from being alone in a room, or the quiet of early morning before the world wakes up. But the silence that appears in conversations. In meetings. In tense moments. After a question has been asked. That silence. Most people rush to escape it. They clear their throat. They add extra words. They repeat what they just said, only louder. They explain again just in case someone didn't understand. Not because they have something important to add, but because silence feels like exposure. Feels like standing in the middle of a room with no shield. And that's exactly why silence holds power. The instinct to fill the gap. Think about the last time you asked a serious question and didn't get an immediate answer. The pause probably felt longer than it actually was. Your mind started racing. Did I say something wrong? Did they hear me? Are they upset? Now think about the last time you were asked a difficult question. You felt it too. That urge to respond quickly. To say something, anything just to break the tension. Silence creates vulnerability. And most people mistake vulnerability for weakness. So they talk. They talk not to communicate, but to protect themselves from discomfort. Leaders are different. Leaders are not afraid of silence. Not because they enjoy awkward moments. Not because they're cold or distant. But because they understand something most people don't. Silence is not empty. It is active. When a leader pauses before answering, it's not hesitation. It's intention. They're not searching for words, they're choosing them. They let questions sit. They allow the room to breathe. They resist the instinct to rush. And in doing so, they quietly take control of the moment. The pause before the answer. Picture a meeting room. Someone asks a difficult question. One that exposes uncertainty or challenges direction. Everyone turns toward the leader. The room expects an immediate response. But instead, there's a pause. Not a long one. Just a few seconds. But in that space something shifts. The leader isn't scrambling. They're steady. Present. Come. That pause sends a message without a single word. I'm not shaken. I'm not defensive. I'm thinking. The room slows down with them. Letting questions sit. Most people answer questions as fast as possible. They fear that silence will make them look unprepared. Leaders know the opposite is true. When a leader lets a question sit, it forces others to reflect on what they asked. Sometimes the person realizes, maybe that question wasn't as strong as I thought. Maybe the answer is more complex. Maybe I already know part of it. Silence invites responsibility. It shifts the weight of thinking back to the room. And that is leadership. Space after speaking. There is another kind of silence that most people never master. The silence after speaking. Most people don't stop talking because they've made their point. They stop because they run out of words. Leaders stop because they're done. They don't rush to add disclaimers. They don't soften their message with unnecessary explanations. They don't talk themselves out of authority. They say what matters. Then they stop. And that space, that clean, intentional silence, forces people to listen more closely. Why silence works? Silence does three powerful things. First, it shows confidence. Confident people don't rush. They don't need to prove themselves with constant noise. Silence says, I trust my words. I don't need to decorate them. I'm comfortable being seen without hiding behind sound. That comfort is rare. And rarity commands respect. Second, it forces others to think. When words stop, minds start working. Silence pulls people inward. They replay what was just said. They search for meaning. They reflect. When leaders speak less, others engage more. The room becomes active, even though it's quiet. Third, it gives weight to words. Words lose value when there are too many of them. But silence acts like pressure. It compresses meaning. It makes each sentence heavier. When a leader finishes a sentence and doesn't rush to add more, people lean in. Not physically, mentally. They listen harder. Because now, every word feels intentional. The difference between noise and authority. Noise demands attention. Authority attracts it. Noise is loud. Authority is controlled. Noise fills space. Authority owns it. Silence is not the absence of leadership. It is one of its strongest tools. The inner discipline of silence. Silence isn't easy. It takes restraint. It requires emotional control, especially in moments of pressure. When emotions are high, silence feels dangerous. The instinct is to defend, to justify, to explain. But leaders pause. They breathe. They allow emotion to settle before words escape. That discipline prevents regret. It keeps conversations clean, decisions sharp, relationships intact. Silence in conflict. In conflict, silence can feel unbearable. Arguments escalate not because of disagreement, but because neither side pauses. Words pile on top of words. Old issues surface. Unrelated frustrations appear. The original point gets lost. A leader breaks that cycle with silence. Not avoidance. Not withdrawal. But presence without reaction. That pause interrupts emotional momentum. And often, it changes the entire direction of the conversation. Silence builds presence. There's a reason calm voices stand out in loud rooms. Silence amplifies presence. People notice when someone doesn't rush. When someone isn't fighting for attention. When someone speaks, and then lets the moment breathe. That presence feels grounded, stable, trustworthy. and people instinctively follow what feels stable. Learning to use silence. Silence is not about saying nothing. It's about saying only what matters. It's about trusting that your words don't need constant reinforcement. It's about allowing space for understanding instead of flooding it with explanation. When you learn to pause, your words become clearer. Your confidence becomes visible. Your influence deepens. Not because you said more, but because you didn't. The final shift. Silence is uncomfortable for most people. That discomfort is exactly why it works. Leaders are not afraid of silence. They pause before answering. They let questions sit. They allow space after speaking. That silence shows confidence. It forces others to think. It gives weight to words. And when a leader finishes a sentence and doesn't rush to add more, people listen harder. Because silence doesn't weaken words. It makes them heavier. Most people speak to be liked. They don't always realize it. But it shows in the way their voice rises at the end of a sentence. In the way they rush to explain themselves. In the way they look around the room, searching faces for approval. They speak carefully, softly. Not because the moment requires it, but because rejection scares them more than confusion. They ask questions that aren't really questions. Do you agree? Is this okay? What do you think? On the surface it sounds polite, collaborative, considerate, but underneath there's hesitation, a quiet fear. Please don't dislike me. Please don't challenge me. Please tell me I'm doing this right. Most people speak to reduce their own anxiety. They speak to feel accepted. They speak to be liked. And there's nothing wrong with wanting connection. But leadership demands something different. Leaders speak to be effective. That difference is subtle, but once you notice it, you can't unsee it. Leaders don't enter a room trying to win approval. They enter carrying responsibility. They're not focused on how they'll be perceived. They're focused on where things need to go. And because of that, their words sound different. They don't ask the room for permission. They don't test the waters with every sentence. They don't crowd their message with qualifiers and disclaimers. They say, this is the direction. This is the decision. This is the next step. Not aggressively. Not arrogantly. But calmly. There's no rush in their voice. No sharp edge. No need to dominate the space. Just clarity. Certainty doesn't mean being loud. It means being settled. You can hear it when someone has made peace with their decision before speaking. There's no tension in their delivery. No internal argument leaking through their words. They're not trying to convince themselves out loud. They already know. And that changes everything. Think about the moments when you felt most uncertain. Times when the room felt heavy, when things were unclear, when everyone was waiting for someone else to speak first. Maybe it was a meeting where something went wrong. A project slipping behind schedule. A mistake no one wanted to own. Voices overlap. Opinions spill out too quickly. People talk at the problem instead of through it. And then, sometimes, one person speaks. Not louder. Not longer. Just steadier. They don't over-explain. They don't apologize for existing. They don't soften every statement with doubt. They say what needs to be said. This is what happened. This is what we're going to do. This is how we move forward. And something shifts. The room exhales. Not because everyone suddenly agrees, but because uncertainty has been replaced with direction. When someone speaks from certainty, people feel safe following. That safety doesn't come from perfection. It doesn't come from having all the answers. It comes from emotional stability. People don't need a leader who is always right. They need a leader who is grounded. Someone who isn't shaken by silence. Someone who doesn't crumble under pressure. Someone who can carry doubt without spreading it. That's why leaders don't ask, "Is this okay?" Because they understand something most people don't. Asking for agreement too early creates insecurity, not collaboration. When a leader asks the room to decide for them, it sends a quiet message. I'm not sure either. And when the person at the front sounds unsure, everyone behind them becomes unstable. Leadership is not about removing all input. It's about sequencing it correctly. Leaders decide first. Then they invite discussion. They establish direction before debate. This is the direction. Then, here's how we'll refine it. That order matters. Because clarity creates trust. And trust creates openness. People speak more honestly when they feel held by a clear structure. They contribute better when they're not asked to fill a leadership vacuum. That's why leaders don't crowd their language with questions. They don't say, "I think maybe we could possibly try." They say, "We're doing this." And they say it calmly enough that it doesn't feel like force. It feels like stability. There's a misconception that certainty equals ego. That decisiveness equals arrogance. But real certainty is quiet. It doesn't need to prove itself. It doesn't need to push others down. It doesn't need to win every argument. Stands. Think of the leaders you trust most. Not the loud ones. Not the ones who dominate every conversation. The ones who make you feel grounded just by being present. They speak slowly. They leave space between sentences. They don't flinch when challenged. They listen, but they don't wobble. That balance is rare. And it comes from something internal. Certainty isn't about confidence on the surface. It's about resolution beneath it. It's the result of thinking before speaking. Of sitting with uncertainty privately so you don't spread it publicly. Leaders wrestle with doubt alone. They ask themselves the hard questions before they step into the room. They examine the risks. They consider alternatives. They carry the weight. So when they finally speak, they're not processing anymore. They're guiding. And people feel the difference instantly. You can hear it in the way the room gets quieter, not because they're intimidated but because they're paying attention. You can feel it in the way people stop interrupting, not because they're afraid but because they trust where this is going. Certainty creates stillness. And stillness is powerful. Most people avoid it. They fill silence with extra words. They soften statements until they lose meaning. Leaders let silence do its job. They speak. They stop. They allow the words to land. They don't rush to be liked in the gap. They know that leadership isn't about comfort, it's about direction. And direction requires firmness. Not harshness. Not control. Just steadiness. There will always be moments when people disagree. When someone challenges the decision. When doubt enters the room. Leaders don't panic in those moments. They don't backpedal immediately. They don't reframe their sentence to escape discomfort. They listen. Then they respond, not from emotion but from clarity. I hear you. This still stands. Here's why. No drama. No defensiveness. Just grounded presence. That presence does more than any speech ever could. Because people don't follow words. They follow emotional cues. They watch how someone handles pressure. They listen for steadiness under tension. They feel whether a person is anchored or searching. When someone speaks from certainty, even disagreement feels safe. Because there's a sense that someone is holding the wheel. And that's what leadership really is. Not control. Not dominance. Responsibility. The willingness to say, this is the direction. Even when it would be easier to ask for permission. The courage to decide. Even when being liked would feel more comfortable. The discipline to speak with intention. Not emotion. Certainty doesn't mean you're never wrong. It means you're willing to stand still long enough to choose. And when you choose, you commit. That commitment is felt. It steadies people. It calms rooms. It turns chaos into movement. Most people don't realize this until they experience it. Until they're in a moment of uncertainty. And someone speaks, not to be liked but to lead. And suddenly the path is visible. Not because it's easy. Not because it's guaranteed. But because someone was settled enough to point forward. That's why leaders don't ask, is this okay? They say calmly, clearly, this is the direction. This is the decision. This is the next step. And because there's no noise in their voice, no insecurity behind their words, no need for approval, people follow. Not out of fear. Not out of obligation. But because certainty feels like safety. And safety is what allows people to move. The language of influence. There's a moment most people remember. A room. A conversation. A decision that mattered more than it looked at the time. It doesn't always feel dramatic when it's happening. Sometimes it's just a meeting on a Tuesday morning. A quiet office. A circle of chairs. Coffee growing cold on the table. But in that moment something shifts. Not because of volume. Not because of authority. Not because someone tried to impress. It shifts because of how someone spoke. Influential leaders use specific patterns in their speech. Not tricks. Not manipulation. Patterns. And once you notice them, you can't unsee them. The meeting everyone was nervous about. The team had been waiting for this meeting all week. You could feel it in the way people avoided eye contact in the hallway. In the way conversations stopped when someone senior walked by. In the quiet tapping of fingers on desks. Something had gone wrong. A project was behind. Deadlines had slipped. Pressure from above was growing heavier by the day. Everyone walked into the room carrying the same question in their head. Who's going to get blamed? Some people sat straighter, ready to defend themselves. Others leaned back, already exhausted by the thought of explaining. Then the leader walked in. No dramatic entrance. No raised voice. No tight expression. Just calm. They didn't rush to speak. They took a moment. Looked around the room. Let the silence settle instead of fighting it. And then they said the first sentence. Not, I'm disappointed. Not, you should have done better. Not, why did this happen? They said, we're here because we care about getting this right. Just one sentence. But something changed. Why we changes everything. Influential leaders use we instead of I. That choice might seem small, almost insignificant. But to the human brain it's not. I separates. We connects. I creates distance. We creates shared ground. When the leader said we, shoulders relaxed. People stopped bracing themselves. The room softened. No one felt singled out. No one felt cornered. Instead of standing against the leader, the team felt like they were standing with them. We missed the mark. We learned something important. We still have time to correct this. Each sentence quietly said, you're not alone in this. And that matters more than most people realize. The difference between explaining and leading. Most people, when things go wrong, start explaining. They talk more. They justify. They defend. They add detail after detail, hoping clarity will save them. But clarity doesn't come from more words. It comes from better ones. Influential leaders don't drown people in explanations. They say, here's what matters. When the leader reached that part of the meeting, they didn't replay every mistake. They didn't list everything that went wrong. They paused. And then, here's what matters right now. The room leaned in. Not because the leader demanded attention, but because they earned it. They focused the conversation, cut through the noise, removed the emotional clutter. Deadlines, priorities, next actions. Clear, simple, direct. People didn't feel overwhelmed. They felt grounded. Because when someone tells you what matters, your mind stops racing. Why focus feels like safety. Uncertainty creates anxiety. When people don't know what matters, they try to handle everything at once. They overthink. They second guess. They burn energy on the wrong things. That's why focus feels like safety. When a leader says, let's focus on this, they're not avoiding responsibility. They're creating direction. Influential leaders use that phrase deliberately. Instead of, who messed this up? They say, let's focus on the solution. Instead of, this shouldn't have happened. They say, let's focus on what we can control now. There's no blame in that language. No finger pointing. No quiet shame. Just movement. Forward. Challenges, not failures. One of the most powerful shifts in leadership language is how problems are framed. Most people hear failure and shut down. Their mind goes defensive. Their confidence drops. Their creativity disappears. But influential leaders don't frame problems as failures. They frame them as challenges. A challenge is something you engage with. A failure is something you avoid. When the leader said, this is a challenge we're capable of handling, it didn't feel like empty encouragement. It felt believable. Because challenges imply growth. They imply effort. They imply that success is still possible. The team didn't feel smaller. They felt steadier. Direction instead of debate. There's a time for discussion. There's a time for feedback. And there's a time for decision. Influential leaders know the difference. They don't turn every decision into a debate. They don't ask the room to vote on everything. They don't seek permission to lead. They say, this is the direction. Not aggressively. Not arrogantly. Calmly. That calm certainty does something powerful. It removes friction. It removes confusion. It removes endless back and forth. People don't feel silenced. They feel guided. Because direction is a gift when things feel uncertain. Why this doesn't feel manipulative? Here's the part people misunderstand. This language doesn't manipulate. It aligns. Manipulation pressures people. Alignment includes them. When leaders use we, people feel seen. When leaders focus on what matters, people feel respected. When leaders remove blame, people feel safe. No one feels pushed. No one feels cornered. They feel included. And inclusion creates buy-in. The quiet shift in the room. By the end of the meeting, something subtle had changed. The tension wasn't gone, but it was lighter. The problem wasn't solved, but it felt manageable. People weren't leaving defeated. They were leaving focused. Not because the leader promised success, but because they created belief. Belief that the path forward was clear. Belief that they were trusted. Belief that they belonged in the solution. That's influence. Not loud. Not forceful. Not dramatic. Quiet. Steady. Intentional. Why people follow this kind of leader? People don't follow titles. They follow clarity. They follow leaders who speak with purpose. Choose words carefully. reduce chaos instead of adding to it. They follow leaders who make hard moments feel navigable. Influence isn't about control. It's about trust. And trust grows when people feel included instead of judged. The language you carry with you. The most interesting part is this. You don't need authority to speak this way. You don't need a title. You don't need permission. You just need intention. You can say we in your family. You can say here's what matters in conflict. You can say let's focus on this when emotions rise. The language of influence works everywhere. Because it's human. That's influence. Influential leaders use specific patterns in their speech. They use we instead of I. Here's what matters instead of long explanations. Let's focus on this instead of blaming. They frame problems as challenges, not failures. They frame decisions as direction, not debate. This language doesn't manipulate. It aligns. People don't feel pushed. They feel included. That's influence. You can hear emotion in a voice long before you understand the words. Before meaning lands, tone arrives. It's subtle, but it's always there. You notice it on phone calls, in meetings, in moments when the room feels tight, like the air itself is waiting for something to break. You notice it when someone starts talking just a little too fast, like they're trying to outrun their own thoughts. You notice it when a voice sharpens, each word cutting harder than necessary. You notice it when explanations stretch longer and longer, looping back on themselves, filling space that didn't need to be filled. Emotion leaves fingerprints on sound. Fear speeds people up. When someone is afraid, their voice races ahead of their mind. Words tumble out without pause, stacked on top of each other. They don't breathe enough. They don't wait for responses. Silence feels dangerous to them, like something bad will happen if they stop talking. So they keep going. They explain every detail. They justify every decision. They add context no one asked for, hoping that clarity will protect them. But it doesn't. It only reveals the fear they're trying to hide. Anger sharpens a voice. You hear it when someone feels cornered or disrespected. Their words get shorter, harder. Consonants snap. The tone lifts, tight and tense, like a wire pulled too far. Even calm sentences start to sound like accusations. Even neutral statements feel loaded. The message might be reasonable, but the delivery isn't. And people don't listen to reason when they feel attacked. Insecurity makes people over-explain. That one is quieter but just as loud. Insecurity shows up as rambling, as repeated points, as stories that wander instead of landing. The speaker isn't trying to dominate. They're trying to be accepted. They want approval. They want agreement. They want reassurance. So they talk, and talk, and talk, hoping that somewhere in all those words someone will nod and say, yes, I get you. Most people never notice they're doing it. They just feel the tension afterward. The subtle shift in how others respond. The way eyes drift away. The way attention fades. The way authority slips out of the room without anyone saying a word. Leaders notice. Not because they're born different, but because they train themselves to listen, to others and to themselves. They understand something most people don't. Your voice is not just a tool for communication. It's a signal. It tells people whether you're grounded or reactive. Whether you're steady or shaken. Whether you're in control or trying to be. That's why leaders train their voice. Not to sound cold. Not to sound robotic. Not to erase emotion. But to stay slow. Even. Grounded. Controlled, not emotionless. This isn't about suppressing what you feel. It's about choosing how it shows up. A leader still feels pressure. Still feels frustration. Still feels uncertainty. But instead of letting those emotions drive the voice, the leader lets the voice lead the emotions. That skill doesn't come naturally. It's built. It starts with awareness. There's a moment, usually right before speaking, when emotion spikes. The chest tightens. The mind races. The urge to react rises fast and loud. Most people speak right there at the peak of feeling. They let the moment push the words out of them. Leaders pause. Sometimes it's only a second. Sometimes it's a breath. Sometimes it's a quiet count in their head. That pause does something important. It creates distance between feeling and action. It gives the mind time to catch up with the body. It allows choice. And in that space, the leader chooses tone. They lower the speed first. Not dramatically. Just enough. A slightly slower pace forces clarity. It prevents rambling. It gives each word more weight. Then they even out the rhythm. No rushing. No sharp stops. No spikes in volume. Just steady delivery like a hand on a table, firm and calm. Finally, they ground the voice. Grounded voices don't float upward with panic. They don't tremble with urgency. They come from the chest, not the throat. They sound settled even when the situation isn't. This kind of voice does something powerful to a room. It slows everything down. When emotions run high, people don't look for the smartest person. They don't look for the loudest. They don't look for the one with the most words. They look for stability. They look for the person who seems unshaken. They look for the calmest voice. Because calm feels like safety. Imagine a tense meeting. Deadlines missed. Pressure everywhere. People talking over each other. Defensiveness creeping in. Voices rising without anyone noticing. Then one person speaks. Not louder. Not longer. Just calmer. Their voice doesn't compete. It doesn't interrupt. It waits for space and then fills it. The room changes. People stop fidgeting. Someone leans back in their chair. Another person exhales without realizing they were holding their breath. The energy shifts from chaos to focus. Nothing magical happened. No brilliant argument. No dramatic speech. No dominance. Just tone. A calm voice tells people, this is manageable. It says, we're not in danger. It says, there is a way forward. And people respond to that instinctively. This is why leaders don't chase control. They project it. They don't rush to fill silence. Silence doesn't threaten them. In fact, they use it. After they speak, they pause. They let the words settle. They allow space for others to think. They don't rush to explain further unless it's necessary. That silence adds weight to what was said. It signals confidence. It tells others the message stands on its own. Most people feel uncomfortable there. They rush to soften, clarify, or justify. Leaders resist that urge. They trust their tone. They trust their delivery. They trust that calm doesn't need decoration. Over time, people start to notice something. When this person speaks, things feel clearer. When they respond, tension drops. When they talk, the room listens. Not because they demand attention, but because their voice earns it. This doesn't mean leaders never raise their voice or show emotion. It means when they do, it's intentional. Emotion becomes a choice, not a leak. A firm tone is used to draw boundaries. A softer tone is used to reassure. A slower tone is used to steady the group. Nothing is accidental. That's the difference. Most people let their emotions shape their voice. Leaders let their voice shape the moment. And the more pressure there is, the more valuable that skill becomes. Because when things are calm, anyone can sound composed. But when stakes are high, when uncertainty is thick, when fear spreads fast, when people are looking for direction, the calmest voice naturally rises to the top. Not by force. By gravity. People don't consciously think, this person is the leader. They feel it. They feel safe enough to stop panicking. They feel steady enough to focus. They feel guided without being pushed. All because of tone. This is why leadership isn't always about what you say. It's about how you sound when you say it. The voice becomes an anchor. A reference point. A signal that says, stay here. We're steady. And once people associate your voice with stability, something interesting happens. You don't have to speak as often. When you do, people lean in. Because they've learned, through experience, that your tone doesn't add noise. It brings order. That's influence. Not loud. Not aggressive. Not emotional. But controlled. Grounded. Human. Because when emotions run high, the calmest voice becomes the leader. And people will always follow the voice that makes them feel steady. The strength that doesn't raise its voice. There's a moment most people know well. It happens in meetings. In arguments. In quiet conversations that suddenly feel heavier than expected. Someone challenges an idea. A decision. A direction. And inside something tightens. Your chest warms. Your thoughts speed up. Words line up ready to fire. You want to explain. You want to correct. You want to win. Most people speak right there. Leaders don't. Not because they don't feel it. Not because they don't care. But because they've learned something most people haven't. They've learned that arguing to prove you're right is rarely the same thing as leading. Listening before speaking. In a conference room with glass walls and a long table that's seen too many tense discussions, a leader sits back in their chair. Not slouched. Not defensive. Just grounded. Across the table, someone is speaking quickly. Their words tumble over each other, concern mixed with frustration. This doesn't make sense, they say. We're risking too much. I don't see how this helps us. The room gets quiet. Eyes drift toward the leader. This is usually where people jump in. Interrupt. Correct the facts. Defend the plan. But the leader doesn't rush. They listen. Not politely. Not while preparing a rebuttal. But fully. They notice the tension in the speaker's voice. The worry underneath the words. The fear of being overlooked. of making a mistake that can't be undone. Listening isn't passive here. It's intentional. And that's the first thing most people miss. Leaders don't listen to reply. They listen to understand what's actually being said. The power of acknowledgement. When the speaker finally stops, there's a pause. Not an awkward one. A steady one. Then the leader speaks. I understand your concern. That's it. No defense yet. No explanation. Just acknowledgement. You can feel the shift immediately. The speaker's shoulders drop slightly. The room exhales. Because being heard does something powerful to people. It doesn't mean agreement. It doesn't mean surrender. It means respect. Most arguments don't escalate because of disagreement. They escalate because people feel unseen. Leaders know this, so they say things like, I see why this feels risky. That's a fair concern. You're not wrong to think about it that way. Not as tactics. Not as manipulation. But because it's true. You don't have to dismiss someone to move forward. You don't have to win the moment to win trust. Choosing the right words. Only after acknowledgement comes clarity. The leader leans forward slightly now. Voice calm. Measured. Here's what we're optimizing for. The words are simple. No jargon. No over-explaining. Just direction. They don't list every detail they know. They don't overwhelm the room with logic. They focus on the core. What matters most. What guides the decision. This decision serves the bigger picture. Not said defensively. Not said to shut anyone down. Said as an anchor. Because leaders understand something subtle but critical. People don't need every answer. They need to understand why. When people see the larger frame, smaller disagreements lose their power. Letting go of the last word. There's another pause after the leader finishes. Someone else nods. Another person leans back thinking. No one jumps in to argue. And the leader doesn't add more. They could. They have more points. More data. But they stop. Because leaders don't need the last word. They need the right one. The need to keep talking often comes from insecurity. From the fear that silence means weakness. Leaders have made peace with silence. They trust that clarity stands on its own. When words are chosen carefully, they don't need reinforcement. Why winning debates loses influence. There was a time this leader didn't know this. Earlier in their career they argued a lot. They won debates. They proved people wrong. They walked away feeling victorious. But something strange happened. People stopped bringing ideas. Conversations grew shorter. Meetings became quieter, but not in a good way. People complied. They didn't commit. That's when the lesson became clear. You can win an argument and still lose influence. Because influence isn't about dominance. It's about trust. People don't follow the smartest voice in the room. They follow the one that makes them feel safe, respected, and included. The emotional shift. When a leader listens first, something emotional changes in the room. Defensiveness softens. Egos relax. People stop bracing for impact. And when people aren't defending themselves, they start thinking more clearly. This is where progress actually happens. Not in heated exchanges. Not in proving points. But in shared understanding. Leaders create that space intentionally. Calm is not passive. There's a common misconception that listening makes you weak. That acknowledging concerns makes you uncertain. But calm leadership is not passive. It's controlled. It takes strength to stay steady when emotions rise. It takes confidence to not react immediately. It takes discipline to choose words instead of unleashing them. Anyone can argue. Not everyone can lead. Speaking for the bigger picture. When leaders speak, their words have a job. To align. To clarify. To move people forward. They don't speak to protect their ego. They speak to protect direction. That's why phrases like, "This decision serves the bigger picture. Here's what we're optimizing for. This helps us move where we need to go," are so powerful. They lift the conversation out of personal opinions and into shared purpose. Suddenly it's not you versus me. It's us versus the problem. Trust over victory. At the end of the meeting, people leave differently. Not energized by drama. Not drained by conflict. But steady. They may not agree with everything. But they understand the direction. And more importantly, they trust the person leading it. Trust doesn't come from always being right. It comes from being grounded when it matters. From listening when it's uncomfortable. From speaking with intention instead of urgency. The quiet authority. Leaders don't argue to prove they're right. They listen first. They acknowledge. Then they speak. Not to dominate. Not to impress. But to guide. They don't need the last word. They need the right one. Because in the end, winning trust is far more powerful than winning debates. And the strongest leaders in the room? They're rarely the loudest. They're the calmest. One sentence at a time. Leadership language is not a trick. It never was. That realization doesn't come in a dramatic moment. It doesn't arrive with applause or a sudden promotion. It usually comes quietly in the middle of an ordinary day when you notice how people react when you speak, and how they react when you don't. There was a time when you believed leadership was about having the right answers, about speaking confidently, about filling the room with certainty so no one could question you. You watched others do it. Loud voices, long explanations, strong opinions delivered without hesitation. And sometimes it worked. But over time you started to notice something else. The loudest voices were often interrupted. The longest explanations were forgotten. The people who spoke the most were rarely the ones the room waited for. That observation sat with you longer than expected. Clarity comes before language. Leadership language doesn't start with words. It starts before that. It starts in the mind. On the days when your thoughts are scattered, your speech follows. You explain too much. You repeat yourself. You jump between ideas hoping something will land. And people sense it immediately, even if they can't explain why. But on the days when your thinking is clear, something shifts. You don't rush. You don't over-explain. You don't feel the need to prove anything. You speak and then you stop. And that's when people lean in. Inner clarity creates outer calm. And outer calm changes the way your words land. It's not that you suddenly sound smarter. It's that you sound grounded, certain, present. People don't respond to perfection. They respond to stability. The moment you stop performing. Most people speak while thinking. Leaders think before speaking. That difference seems small, but it changes everything. There's a moment, often unnoticed, when someone stops performing and starts leading. It's the moment they realize they don't need to fill every silence. They don't need to answer immediately. They don't need to impress. They just need to be intentional. You felt it before. A meeting where tension is high. Opinions collide. Everyone talks a little faster than usual. Voices overlap. Explanations stretch longer and longer. And then someone speaks. Not loudly. Not urgently. Not emotionally. Just clearly. They say one sentence. Maybe two. Then they pause. The room changes. Not because the sentence was magical, but because the calm behind it was real. Staying calm when it matters most. Staying calm isn't about suppressing emotion. It's about choosing control over reaction. Real leadership shows up when emotions run high, when frustration is justified, when pressure is real, when uncertainty is unavoidable. Anyone can speak well when things are easy. But when things are tense, language reveals who you are. You can feel the urge to jump in, to correct, to defend, to explain. And you don't. You breathe. You listen. You wait until your words have a job. Calm doesn't mean passive. It means deliberate. People feel it immediately. They sense that you're not being pulled by the moment, that you're standing inside it, steady. And without realizing it, they start matching your pace. Speaking intentionally changes the room. When you speak with intention, people notice before they understand why. Interruptions stop. Side conversations fade. Eyes lift from screens. Not because you demanded attention, but because you earned it. Intentional language is simple. It avoids decoration. It avoids excess. Every sentence knows its purpose. You don't say more to sound convincing. You say less because you already are. And when words are chosen carefully, they carry weight. They linger. They get repeated after the meeting ends. They become reference points. Remember when they said, "That line really stuck with me. I keep thinking about that one sentence." That's presence. Leadership is not volume. There's a common misunderstanding about leadership, that it needs to be loud to be strong. That authority must announce itself. That confidence has to be visible from across the room. But real confidence is quieter than that. It doesn't rush to be heard. It doesn't compete for space. It doesn't react to every challenge. It simply exists. And people feel it. The most influential voices often speak softly, not because they lack power but because they don't need to use it to be believed. They don't raise their voice. They lower the noise. Presence is felt, not explained. Presence isn't something you tell people you have. It's something they experience. It's the way you sit when others are restless. The way you pause when others rush. The way your words arrive without force. Presence doesn't demand agreement. It creates focus. And focus is rare. In a world full of noise, constant opinions, endless explanations, someone who speaks with restraint stands out without trying. Not because they're different, but because they're intentional. Built one sentence at a time. Presence isn't built in big moments. It's built sentence by sentence. It's built when you choose clarity over cleverness. When you choose calm over speed. When you choose meaning over volume. Each sentence you speak teaches people how to listen to you. If you talk constantly, they learn to tune out. If you speak with intention, they learn to wait. And waiting is powerful. Learning to say less. Saying less doesn't mean saying nothing. It means saying what matters. It means trusting that your message doesn't need padding. That your silence doesn't weaken your authority. That pausing doesn't make you uncertain, it makes you composed. When you stop filling space with words, space fills with attention. People start noticing when you speak, not just what you say. And that changes everything. The power of the pause. Pausing is uncomfortable. Especially at first. There's a moment after you finish speaking where your instincts tell you to add more. To clarify. To soften. To explain. And you don't. You let the sentence stand. That pause does something powerful. It gives your words time to land. It signals confidence. It invites thought instead of reaction. Silence becomes part of your language. And suddenly the room listens differently. When the room gets quiet. Something subtle happens when leadership language is used well. The room gets quiet. Not awkwardly quiet. Focused quiet. People stop waiting for their turn to talk. They start processing. They start considering. They start listening, not just to you but to the direction being set. And without demanding it, all eyes turn toward you. Not because you spoke the most, but because you spoke with presence. The shift you can feel. You'll notice it first in small ways. People stop interrupting. They wait for your response. They quote your words later. Conversations slow down when you enter them. Decisions feel more settled after you speak. Not because you forced control, but because your language carried clarity. Leadership redefined. Leadership language is not a trick. It's a reflection of inner clarity. When you think clearly, you speak clearly. When you stay calm, others follow. When you speak intentionally, people listen. Not out of obligation, but out of trust. Leadership isn't about volume. It's about presence. And presence isn't loud. It's steady. It's intentional. It's felt. The quiet authority. So speak less. Choose better words. Pause more. Let silence work for you. Let clarity do the heavy lifting. And you'll notice something powerful happen. The room will get quiet. And all eyes will turn to you, not because you demanded attention but because you earned it. One sentence at a time.